Sustainable overconsumption, an oxymoron it sounds, The Paradox of Seduction and Morality by Nabila Nisha, Patrick D'Espoir, Decosta, and Mikael Andéhn.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nabila, and I am delighted to be here today to present my research on sustainable overconsumption, the paradox of seduction and morality. I'm currently based at the Australian National University, and this study that I'm going to present to you today has been partially derived from my PhD thesis. I'm co-authoring this with my supervisors, Patrick from Australian National University and Mikael from Royal Holloway, University of London. Before I start, there are three things that you need to know about me. First, I'm not good with preparing slide decks, so do excuse me for that. Second, I do talk fast, and I do talk a lot. And I especially do that when I'm nervous, which brings me to the third one. I am especially nervous today because one of my PhD thesis examiners is currently present in this room. So if you're wondering, I do have the PhD. It's been 2 years, but it still makes me nervous that the person is present here. So as I go along with my nervousness, I'll take you through my study. So back in 2022, I don't know how, okay, sorry. Yeah, so. Back in 2022, there was this article that I read on fashion renting in The Guardian. And the protagonist in that article was Cara, a 30-year-old fashion renter, who quoted that fashion renting is more sustainable, and yet she gets to wear something new every weekend. This one sentence captures the heart of the seductive promise that fashion rentals makes to consumers, something that feels modern, ethical, and aspirational, and yet, it does hint towards a deeper contradiction. Can we really consume our way into sustainability through fashion renting? Let's imagine how this looks like in practice. To help your imagination, I have used some AI-generated images. I hope that helps. So, say Cara has been invited to a friend's wedding. She goes to her wardrobe. She has a wardrobe full of clothes, and yet she believes that she has nothing to wear. So she opens up her phone, she goes to a fashion rental platform, and she rents a designer dress. The dress arrives in good condition, she wears it, she takes photos in it, and then she returns back the dress to the platform. Now, Cara believes that she has made a sustainable choice, but has she really? Cara and many others who do fashion renting may not realize that the same designer dress has been previously rented by multiple users, and in the process, it has been dry cleaned and shipped several times, now ready for renting again to another set of users, perhaps within that same month. So yes, the designer dress did not end up in the landfill yet. But there are environmental implications that are associated with the practice of fashion renting. So this story about Cara basically captures the essence of the paradox that sits at the heart of our study and motivates our study. How moral appeals can coexist with and even enable overconsumption. We call this phenomenon sustainable overconsumption, where moral narratives justify continued indulgence. And we argue that this phenomenon of sustainable overconsumption presents a challenge to the notion of social marketing, which seeks to influence behaviors for societal benefit. Now, what is fashion renting? Fashion renting basically is a novel form of consumption that is positioned as environmentally sustainable and economically inclusive alternative to traditional ownership models. These platforms promote shared usage, waste reduction, and circular economy principles, aligning closely with the social marketing goals. They promise access without ownership. They promise novelty without you feeling guilty. And they promise style with sustainability, all of which are powerful vehicles in the social marketing narrative that seeks to promote behavioral shifts towards equity, well-being, and environmental consciousness. Now, social marketing is no longer only limited to individual consumers at the downstream level or individual decision making. It also works across upstream, the policy level, as well as midstream at the community level. So how does fashion renting integrate into these three perspectives of social marketing? So what fashion renting does is they operate at the midstream level, where they mobilize a community of women across ideals of ethical fashion and inclusion. At the same time, they do target individual consumers at the downstream level by promoting behaviors towards shared usage and waste reduction. But these platforms also seduce consumers. How? Because there is the thrill of novelty. You get luxury at lesser price. And of course, there is the emotional high of a renewed wardrobe, all of which coexist within the moral imperative. So this blend of seduction and morality actually creates a feedback loop that fuels desire under the guise of ethics. Now, theoretically, this dualism echoes the foundational work of Belk and colleagues on desire theory, where desire is described as a cycle of longing, fulfillment, and renewal that is driven by seduction but restrained by morality. So within desire theory, consumers have been portrayed as being largely caught up within these two opposing forces of seduction and morality, but not necessarily how they resolve that tension. So our study builds on and extends on this idea. We ask, how do consumers interpret and reconcile seductive and moral appeals in fashion rental platforms? And how does this negotiation contribute to sustainable overconsumption? To do this study, we have used a multi-method qualitative approach. We focused on a leading fashion rental platform in the United States by the name Rent the Runaway. We immersed ourselves into a virtual community on Facebook that has women subscribers of Rent the Runaway. We gave it a pseudonym for the purpose of this study, RTR Rentals. Now, this virtual community, on an average, they have monthly more than 300 posts, and those posts basically share unfiltered insights about women's rental experiences, how they justify it, how they debate about it, and how they celebrate renting fashion. So we used ethnography in order to gather data. Over a 3-year period, 2021 to 2023, we collected more than 4,600 on-topic posts, which talks about their rental experiences. We also collected interview data. We did 50 semi-structured interviews with the women from the very same community, aged between 25 to 50. We used purposive and snowball sampling to capture a diverse range of their experiences, resulting in a total of more than 55 hours of recordings. We analyzed the data using the constructivist grounded theory, where we applied the 3-stage coding process in order to uncover how consumers construct, justify, and negotiate their way out of that tension which they face when they are caught up between the two opposing forces of seduction and morality. So what did we find? Our first finding relates to the seductive appeal of fashion rental itself. Now, if you look at the quotes on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see that previously participants used to buy something whenever they needed something new. That has changed. How? Because now when they need something new, they go and rent it. And in the process, they ensure that they are not repeating their outfit. Whenever they are posting photos on social media, the outfit is not the same as before. And they do this through renting. So fashion rental has basically reignited what participants refer to as the wear once lifestyle. And this pattern, what happens is when they are renting a new item, every time they do experience that momentary joy, which mirrors the theoretical notion of desire being ephemeral and self-renewing. So once you have the item, you feel that momentary joy, but that vanishes and then reignites your desire for the next new thing. Now, the result is that participants get entangled in a repeated cycle of swapping items of rented fashion, and that results in excessive consumption. What I just told you, this is something that you have previously heard or read about it. The difference is this pattern has previously been associated with fast fashion purchases. And you may have realized that the underlying behavior hasn't changed. Whether it is access or ownership, whether it is rented fashion or fast fashion, the underlying behavior is the same. What has changed with fashion renting is that the seductive appeal is now framed within the language of sustainability. For example, you get the thrill of the new, but you are not creating waste. So what is the implication of our finding? Our finding challenges the downstream perspective of social marketing, where the responsibility is placed on individual consumers to make ethical choices. And we ignored the fact that consumers are operating within a seductive commercial context, whether it is access or ownership, whether they are dealing with rented fashion or fast fashion. Our next finding is related to moral narratives. Now, driven by the seductive appeal of rented fashion, consumers do not just consume it. What they do is they narrate their actions through moral frames or moral justifications. If you look at the quotes on the right-hand side of the slide, you will realize that participants do acknowledge that they're renting too much. But the reason that they give is related to the fact that they are not buying fast fashion. So it is not wrong. The fact that they feel better because they are not adding to the landfills. Now, you may argue that they are using their moral reasoning to justify indulgence, which theoretically aligns with the notion of moral self-licensing. It is true, but at the same time, the unique perspective that we bring to in our study is the fact, if you notice, their reasoning is anchored in the social marketing message that revolves around the concept of fashion renting, that of environmental consciousness. So the implication of our finding is we shed light on the dual role of social marketing, which not only influences behavior, but also provides a moral framework for justifying that behavior, resulting in excessive consumption. Our third finding relates to self-serving altruism. Now, one of the other things that we have observed among our participants is the fact that they framed their spending on rental fashion as being generous, as something that they're doing out of generosity. Why? If you look at the quotes on the left-hand side of the slide, they believe that the money that they're spending on rental fashion helps keep the platform staff employed. So they're supporting the workers. The fact that when they rent from designers of color, they are basically, it's not only limited to wearing something new, but they are supporting something bigger. So they are supporting equity initiatives, in other words. So every time that participants are referring to supporting workers through their rental spending, theoretically, they are mirroring the concept of pro-social spending, where we spend money in order to benefit others. Participants have also mentioned that they feel an emotional satisfaction when they are doing the perceived good by supporting workers or by supporting the equity initiatives, and that sentiment reflects the theoretical notion of warm glow, as well as it aligns with the universalist values of welfare and justice. as well as equality. So the implication here is that the moral overlay that participants have been using here challenges the midstream perspective of social marketing. You remember I mentioned at the beginning that fashion rental platforms operate at the midstream because they are building community of women across the ideals of ethical fashion and inclusion. And now what consumers are doing is they are using those same ideals of value-based communities and trying to do something good for the community. But in doing that, they are actually unintentionally reinforcing excessive consumption. So, how do we contribute to the literature? The first thing that we contribute is to the desire theory. Now, the desire theory, as I mentioned before, has largely portrayed consumers as being trapped in the dialectical tension between seduction and morality. We do not believe so. We think that consumers are not trapped in that tension. They actively construct moral justifications. And in doing so, they are appropriating the social marketing language of equity, well-being, and environmental consciousness. We also extend the desire theory by introducing the concept of sustainable overconsumption, where we believe, as previously the desire theory said, morality is a counterforce to desire. It restrains desire. But our findings show that morality actually legitimizes more consumption, as consumers are strategically using morality to justify indulgence. And finally, we critique and extend the work of Sportswood and colleagues, where social marketing is framed as being something that promotes environmental behavior. We are not disagreeing with that fact. However, we are saying that social marketing at the same time also serves as a moral coping tool, helping consumers rationalize indulgence, not just moderate it. And in that process, we believe that consumers have taken a co-creative role as they reinterpret the same social marketing messages that were part of the reason that they started renting fashion. In practice, platform designers can actually leverage social marketing to nudge individual consumers at the downstream level, for example, by setting default rental limits for a specific time period, or by integrating or personalizing their dashboards with the environmental implications of their rentals. And the visible impact of what they're doing might disrupt the moral comfort. At the upstream and the midstream level, policy makers may support the development of industry-wide usage guidelines, such as recommending rental frequencies, as well as promoting collective awareness that fosters shared ethical limits through, and when there are visible socially reinforced expectations around how much you can rent, that might, again, disrupt the moral comfort. Oh, sorry, I didn't change the slide. And finally, let me take you back to Cara. So Cara did not buy a new dress, and that's a win. But she also did not change her way of consuming fashion. What she did was she wrapped her consumption in a blanket of moral comfort. We have to remember something about rental fashion, the fact that it might be a way to avoid buying new, but it also has the environmental implication where there is an endless cycle of packaging, transport, and cleaning associated with it. And with that reflection, there is an important challenge for social marketing to move beyond encouraging ethical choices in a system that still promotes overconsumption through the seductive appeal. Social marketing should focus on helping individuals question their desires and make more mindful choices. They can work to reshape social norms by fostering shared ethical boundaries within the communities that rent rental fashion. And of course, they should be pushing for structural changes like industry transparency or industry guidelines that make choosing less, not just possible, but probably a bit easier. And that's about it. Am I within time? Yes, all right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nabila. Very interesting. I'm looking at it through the lens of psychology. Freud's work, ego, id, superego, and the fact that we try to satisfy our basic desires through socially accepted means. So what is your contribution comparing that perspective?
Look, at the individual consumer level, there probably yet isn't any intervention which we can use to say that it will suppress our desire. The objective is not to work with that aspect of consumer psychology, which probably contributes to suppressing the desire. It basically is negotiating that desire, how you go about that, how you manage your expectations, and how. So for example, one of the interventions that I think that we can do is probably setting a limit on how much you can rent. So that might be playing with consumer psychology in how you are suppressing your desire, but it doesn't necessarily mean that even if I set a limit, I'm going to be able to follow it. So consumer psychology is really dense, and it probably requires a lot of work in order to come up with interventions where we can really work to suppress or manage the very element of desire, because desire is going nowhere, to be honest.
Thanks, Nabila. Really, really interesting.
Thank you.
And I was, not to make it about my paper again, but I was looking at that and I was thinking it really maps with what we were looking at in the paper I talked about earlier, because we had seen within our empirical data that people's practices didn't change because their value perception hadn't changed. And it's really nice to sort of validating that you found a similar thing, that the value of wanting new, the experience of validation, external validation of having something new and a new dress each time hasn't changed, and the behaviors have just shifted. So I was wondering if you had thought about how to target the value benefit that they're receiving of actually having that desire for newness, because until that's kind of taken out, how can we expect to change behavior if the benefit is still so such a strong motivator?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you have ever looked at what the rental platforms put on their website. It is basically every week there is a new collection. That's fast fashion language. That is not sustainable language, to be honest. I'm giving you free shipping. I am not charging you for insurance. I am telling you you can get new things on every occasion. So there might be a problem with the language that specifically this context is using. We might be able to do something in terms of the value that we offer through these consumption models. Probably say, do not rent for the new, but maybe rent with a purpose. Do not refresh, but rather focus on being mindful about your choices. So probably the wording of the languages might be different, but this brings back to what Marjan said. Yeah. The consumer psychology is something that requires a lot of work for us to be able to manage our expectations around that. And one of the findings, implications of our findings was, we cannot ignore the fact that consumers operate in a seductive commercial landscape. So it is not only us as consumers. There has to be interventions at the upstream, midstream, as well as the consumer. So leaving everything or blaming everything on consumer desire is probably not the right way to go. If the value framing of the same consumption models are changed, if there are interventions at the upstream level, as well as the midstream level that are in place, that might change few things, because at the end of the day, these new consumption models of access-based renting were brought in as an alternative so that we don't go and buy fast fashion. But in the process of doing the business, they have actually mirrored the same thing as fast fashion. It's just with the only difference. Now it is not hoarded in our wardrobes. We are not owning it. With that slight distinction, if you get it away, it's the same pattern. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think there's just a question online. Melissa Dyson asks, what data has supported this research?
So we gathered data. Sorry, how do you go back? Yep. So we gathered data from a virtual community. It's a Facebook group of the subscribers of Rent the Runaway. Last I checked, back in 2023, they had more than 150,000 subscribers. And they are active subscribers to the platform. They are based in the United States, and we immersed ourselves in that virtual community in order to gather data. We also interviewed women from that very same community, and we spoke to them about their experiences.
I think what resonates for me is, like, when we're talking about upstream and downstream and things like that too, is that broader conversation around, you know, what is sustainability, and actually being allowed to imply that what we're doing or what those platforms are doing is sustainable. So whether it's through the messaging that they're using, whether it's really implicit or just, you know, very clever. But I think that's also a challenge at a broader sort of policy level around, you know, allowing platforms to even imply that there's a sustainability aspect when actually there isn't. So I just think that's interesting, because I know historically there was such a strong, I guess, proof of burden that you were actually environmentally friendly if you wanted to sort of imply or say that. So I think it's just that interesting balance between, you know, letting them, I guess, convey that even if they're not doing it directly. But that's just another interesting observation, I think, about this whole topic.
Yeah.
In general.
Look, I teach sustainable marketing at ANU, and it's an undergrad level course. And one of the common questions that I get from the students is, what is sustainability? So yes, you're right. There is a problem with the root concept of sustainability because it's so broad, it is so diverse, that we cannot pinpoint on what somebody is doing in terms of a consumption model or in terms of practices. Is it really sustainable? Does it really fall into a checklist that tells us that this is sustainability? So probably the work needs to go back to the root level, where we actually need to define what we understand or what we are expecting around the domain of sustainability before we can move into upstream, midstream, and downstream levels.
I was just going to comment further to that point. I was thinking about it this morning as well when I think it was Maria was talking about or Nadia was talking about technological changes and that legislation hasn't really caught up. And if you think about how strict advertising used to be, that you actually had to be able to prove that you couldn't just say something, you actually had to be able to prove it. And that sort of regulation or, I don't know, the governance just isn't there. And it doesn't seem right, but I don't know if maybe I'm out on a limb on that, but there's a lot on the consumer to do so much research to understand whether a claim is correct or not.
Yes, there is a lot to do research, and specifically on that point, I'm not sure if you are aware. One of the things that they are now doing, which again brings back to the point of sustainable overconsumption, let's say I start a fashion rental platform and I tell you it is sustainable, keep renting. And then I also introduced the resale model, where I'm telling you, you can buy those same pre-owned clothes at discounts. Am I being sustainable? Am I not promoting consumption? I'm doing business. But at the end of the day, that same platform, and I'm going to urge you to go log in to Rent the Runaway. You open it, there is renting, and right below it says, buy pre-loved collections. You can get it not only on their website, you can get it through Amazon as well. You all watch Netflix, don't you? Netflix has their own original content. In the same way, Rent the Runaway has their own in-house collection. That is also what they're trying to sell you. So we are basically trapped with this seductive model. And the pre-loved collection, you can get it at 80% off RRP. Those are designer dresses. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done at the consumer level, because these models that are presented to us, in a sense, they might be using the language of sustainability, but if you really look hard, there are a lot of doubts of whether they are truly, truly sustainable.
I just have a comment like the sustainable goals of the United Nations, the goal number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. So we don't distinct like trying to separate consumption and production. It must come together. So like the point is like production must change before we put so much force and like enforcement on the consumers. So look at the case of like in New Zealand, we banned single-use plastic packaging since 2019. But the problem is like there's a lot of single-use plastic is still in the country, and especially like in the local shops. And what do you think like the roles of regulations and laws, and how like it can impact and reinforce the use or the like enactment of social marketing?
To answer your question, I do have another question to counter. Are there industry regulations, or are there any authoritative body which do look into these consumption models, which do look into how these platforms do their business? I'm not aware. So this is a question. It's a genuine question. So if there are, like Airbnb, like Uber, like every consumption model that has come broadly under the umbrella of sharing economy, this is, again, sharing. But if there is no specific authoritative body that looks into these platforms and how they do the business, we can propose an intervention, but it remains to be seen how it is going to be implemented going forward. Because from what I understand, it is right now unregulated. There is no particular accountability that these platforms have to go through. Yes, Rent the Runaway, this is something that I saw on LinkedIn. I don't remember when, probably sometime when I was doing the PhD. They did publish a report of how much water they're saving, of how much carbon emission that they are trying to control. But again, there was a question about the legitimacy of the numbers that they're putting out there. So there is no specific body to which they're answerable. So we did propose interventions. But again, unless there is somebody who's really in charge to look at how they are running their business, it is a complicated scenario that we are dealing with. Does that answer your question?
Back in the 1990s, maybe before you were born, Gulis Ger and I did a study of materialism, and we talked to people from 4 different areas of the world. There were Americans, Romanians just after the communist revolution, getting rid of communism. There were Turks, and there were Northern Europeans. And we looked at justifications and excuses. Now, justification is the moral justification that you're talking about. I did it, but it's not wrong. On the other hand, excuses are, I did it, it's wrong, but there are extenuating circumstances. And so the Turks said, well, it's not for me, but the children need a big screen television because they would suffer relative to their peers in school. The Romanians said, under communism, Ceausescu sent all the good things out of the country. We deserve to catch up with the rest of the world. The Americans said, well, we earned it, damn it. We should be able to buy whatever we want. And the Northern Europeans said, well, it's those stupid Americans. They buy all of these silly gadgets. We have good taste, and so we spend our money on good travel and good wine and good fashions, and that's not really materialistic at all. So besides justifications, there are also excuses that people use.
Yeah.
But thank you, brilliant. And thank you all. I think it's tea time, and thank you all for the questions.
Thank you, everyone.